Hello and welcome to an Envato Tuts Plus tutorial. I'm Adi Purdila, and in today's video you'll learn how to build a responsive navbar with Flexbox. Now recently Anna Monis published this fantastic tutorial on the topic. She's very thorough and the tutorial is very well written. What you're watching now is a slightly more condensed video version of that written tutorial. So if you're ready, let's begin. Alright, so let's get started with the markup or the HTML code. Now for this, I'm just gonna write it and then walk you through it because, writing HTML is pretty straightforward and I don't want to waste a lot of time doing that. So here we go. This is what our page currently looks like. And let's go over this HTML code. We start by defining a nav element. This will contain our navbar. Then the actual menu that's inside will be placed inside this UL class menu. This will eventually be the Flexbox container, and all of the list items will be Flexbox items. Next, we define the logo as a list item with a link inside. Of course, you can add an image instead of just plain text. It's really up to you. And then each list item is defined as an li with a class of item, and it contains an anchor tag. Now for the menu items that have submenus, here's what we do. We define the li as usual with the correct class, but we also add a class of has submenu, and this will be used in JavaScript to target this element and also in CSS to style it a little bit differently. Now for the items that have submenus, we place the menu text in an anchor tag without an href attribute because that will lead to nowhere basically. It's just there so we can add a click event listener to it. And we're adding tab index 0 so that people using keyboards can just tab through these menu items. Then under that link, we're defining a second UL with a class of submenu, and this will contain the menu items for the submenu. And we do the same for this. So we have two links that have submenus, services and plans. And then at the very end, we have some more regular menu items, and then we have two buttons for login and sign up. These have the additional classes of button and also secondary on the sign up. And finally, we have a button that looks something like this. This is an icon that's using Font Awesome, or is part of the Font Awesome library, and we're creating that icon with this HTML code. As you'll see, if I open up my CSS settings, I am loading Font Awesome right here. So this markup gave us this structure in the page. Really simple, very straightforward. It's just a bunch of nested, unordered lists. Currently, we don't have any styling for it, so that's why it's looking like that, but I think it's time we add a little bit of basic styling. For the styling, I'm going to open up the CSS tab here on CodePen, and here's what we'll do. We'll create a quick reset style for all elements, where we'll be adding box sizing. We'll set this to border box, and then we're just going to reset the margin and padding. Then we'll add some default typography styles to the body. We'll set the font family to sans serif, and we'll do a font size of 16 pixels. Cool. Next, let's target that navigation or the main parent element, and let's add a background to it and a little bit of padding. So background 222 will be enough for now. Padding 0.15 pixels. Next, let's target these anchor tags and change their color and also remove the underline. So I'm going to say A, color white, text decoration none. Next up, let's remove the bullet points from the lists. So for that, I'm going to target menu and submenu, and I'm simply going to say list style type none. Next, let's turn our attention to the logo. I want the font size to be a little bit bigger than usual and also add a little bit of padding. So we'll say logo, font size 20 pixels, and also padding. Let's do this 7.5 pixels, 10, 7.5 again, and 0. And that adds 7.5 pixels to top and bottom, 10 pixels to the right, 0 to the left. Let's target the actual items and add a little bit of padding around them. I'm going to say 10 pixels here. Cool. And let's also target the buttons, the login and sign up. So I'm going to say item that also has a class of button, padding. Let's do 9 pixel, 5 pixel. Now let's add some hover states. So for this, I'm going to say item that's not a button, a hover, and also item a hover after. And I'll explain what this is doing in just a little bit. So we're just using this kind of gray color, and as you can see, it activates on button hover. Now this style is applied to menu items that are not buttons, so they work on these, but they don't work on these. And also, they will work, or the style will be applied to the after pseudo elements of the anchor tags on hover. And those pseudo elements will be added later. We're going to have some arrows pointing down here on the menu items that have submenus. And for now, that should be about it for the basic styling. Now, let's start creating the actual mobile menu. All right, to create the mobile navigation, we'll start with this menu. We'll set display to flex, and just by doing that, you can see that our entire menu just changed its layout. It's now in one row because by default flex direction is set to row. But let's actually wrap up these elements, because right now there is this weird looking scroll bar. So for that we'll say flex wrap. We'll set the value to wrap. So now they'll wrap around depending on the available horizontal space. Let's add equal distance between each menu item. For that we'll say justify content space between, and let's also align items to the center, and that will basically align their vertical centers like that. All right, now let's go a little bit more in depth with the styling for the menu links. So I'm going to say menu list item A. By default, anchor tags are inline elements, but we're going to set them to display blocks so we can add various paddings to them and margins and stuff. I'm going to say padding 15 pixels and 5 pixels. So 15 top bottom, 5 pixels left and right. And let's do the same for the sub items. So I'm going to say menu sub item A, padding 15 pixels. And these are the elements that were just targeted. And then let's start changing the order of some of these buttons, because I want this toggle element on mobile to be the next element after my logo. I want these buttons to be after the toggle, and I want my main menu to be the last element. And that's actually surprisingly easy to do because we're using Flexbox. In Flexbox, you can use the order property to define the order of the flex items, which is fantastic. So we're going to start with the toggle element. We're going to set order to 1. And also let's increase the size a little bit. Let's make it as big as the logo in terms of font size, so 20 pixels. Then let's target the buttons. So item button, I'm going to set order to, and notice these two have now swapped places. We have order 1, order 2, and now I have to target the actual items, and I'm going to set order 3 on those. So now we have toggle, buttons, and main menu. Since we're on the topic of items, let's also give them a width of 100%. And let's align the text to the center. And also, I'm going to do this, display none. And this will hide them. So we can come back later and write the necessary JavaScript for these items to be shown when we click this toggle button. All right. So to show them, we're going to create a class that's called active. And any item that's inside a container with a class of active will have their display property set to block. And finally, what I'm going to do here is say button secondary. I'm just going to add a border bottom to this of 1 pixel, 444 solid. And if we take a quick look at what that's doing, is it's just creating a small separation between the buttons and the rest of the menu items. So with that, the mobile navigation is created. Now let's quickly style the submenus and add the rest of the necessary bits and pieces. All right, for the submenu, I'm actually gonna comment this line so we can see what we're working with. We'll do the following. We'll set submenu display none, and that hides them. We'll be using this a little bit later, and then we'll say submenu active submenu. We'll set display block. We'll use this submenu active class in JavaScript to hide or show the submenu. Then we'll do the following. We'll target the items that have a submenu, and we'll target the immediate anchor tag, and then it's after pseudo element. Basically, we're doing this so we can add a small icon right next to the text on items that have submenus. We'll be using Font Awesome for that, and it's super simple. I'm going to set its font family to Font Awesome 5 free because that's the one that we're using. Let's set the font size to 12 pixels, line height to 16 pixels. Let's also make these a little bit bolder. And for the content, we're going to do \F078. And just like that, with magic, we have these arrow downs. I'm going to show you exactly how I got to this value in just a little bit. For now, let's change the color to white to make sure everything is set up properly, and let's add a padding left of 5 pixels. And that's just so the icon is spaced a little bit from the text. Okay, now how exactly did I get to this value? Well, if you go to the Font Awesome website and you go to icons, all you have to do is find the icon you like. So let's browse to free. Let's go to, like, for example, arrow. So let's say you want to add this chevron down, right? You click on it, and this is the Unicode that you need, F078, exactly the one that we're using. If you want to use that in HTML, just like we did here for the toggle, for this one, you would write the I element like this. I class FAS for font awesome, solid. FA bars, this is the name of the icon, right? So if I were to copy this over to here, I would have that chevron in place of that menu icon. So it's really simple to work with font awesome. All right, so let's go back to our submenus here. And let's do the following. Sub item A. Let's do a padding 10 pixels and 15 pixels. And this will just basically style these elements a little bit differently. And then here's what we'll do. We'll define a class submenu active, and we'll use background color 111. This is a darker gray. And also we'll do a border radius of 3 pixels. And the submenu active class will be applied to the submenu that is currently opened. Now, right now, of course, we don't have a working submenu because we haven't written any kind of JavaScript. So let's go ahead and add the toggle functionality. For that, first I'm gonna uncomment these two styles. So we're left with our blank slate here. And the idea is, for the toggle functionality, when I click this button, first of all, the icon is gonna change from the bars to an X, and my mobile menu will be shown right here. So let's go to JavaScript, and we'll start with toggling the mobile menu. We'll define two constants, one for toggle, and we'll say document query selector, and we'll select toggle, and then another constant for the menu. So that's going to be equal to document query selector menu. You can use variables here, no problem, but I prefer to use constants. It's more in line with the direction JavaScript is going lately. So then we're going to write a function called toggle menu, although you can name this whatever you want. And we'll do the following. Toggle add event listener. On click, we're going to activate toggle menu, and we're going to pass in false. If you want to learn more about using event listeners, check out the written version of the tutorial. You'll find a link to another tutorial there by Anna, where she does a fantastic job explaining all of this. Basically, what we're doing here is we're adding a click event listener to the toggle element, to this one. And when the click takes place, we're running the toggle menu function, which is this. It's really, really straightforward. So inside, here's what we'll do. First, we'll check if our menu contains or has the class of active. And if it does, we'll remove it and we'll switch the icon to bars, which is the default state. If it doesn't have the class of active, which means it's in this state, we'll add the class of active to the menu and we'll switch the icon to the X. Really simple. And that code looks something like this. So if our menu has a class of active, then we're removing that class of active. And then we're targeting the toggle, and then we're targeting the child anchor tag. We're accessing its inner HTML, and we're just basically changing this little bit right here. We're changing from FA, whatever it is, to FA bars. Else, so if our menu isn't active, then we make it active, and we're changing the icon to FA times, which is the X I'm about to show you. So now if we click this, the icon changes and the menu is displayed. How simple is that? Now, what about the drop-down functionality? This is what we have to do next. For the submenus, here's what we'll do. We'll define a constant called items, although you can name it whatever you want. And I'm going to say document query selector all item. Basically, we're grabbing all of the menu elements that have a class of item into this, this entity right here. And then we'll do the following. We'll define a function called toggle item. And when should this function be triggered? Well, it should be triggered when I'm clicking on an item that has a class of submenu. So what we need to do now is add the event listeners for click on those items. For that, we're going to loop through all of the menu items using a for statement. So for, and we'll define a variable called item of items. And we're going to say if item dot query selector submenu, then we'll say item add event listener on click. We'll toggle the item. We'll set that third variable to false, that third parameter. And we'll also do the same for key press. So I want this menu to be activated, or this submenu to be activated when I click on the parent link, which is this, or when I use my keyboard to navigate. So that's why I'm using the key press event listener. So now, what exactly is the toggle item function doing? Well, here we're basically adding and removing the submenu active class to and from the clicked elements. And in this block here, we're making sure that we're removing the submenu active class from any other submenu that's opened. And by doing that, we ensure that we don't have two submenus that are opened at the same time. So that's pretty straightforward. So now, if we check it out, services, there you go, and plans. So our submenu works perfectly. Cool. So now our mobile or our small device menu is complete. And this is what it looks like. Next, let's work on the tablet menu. And the tablet menu should appear when we are working with at least 700 pixels of width, which is about here, right? So when that happens, what we're going to do is move the login and sign up buttons from this drop-down menu to the main menu here because we have room for them. So let's do that. So let's go back to our CSS and we'll say tablet menu here. We'll use a media query and the condition here will be that the minimum width is 700 pixels. And inside we'll do the following. We'll say menu justify content center, and this will bring everything in the center of my nav bar. And then we're going to say logo flex 1. Now the flex property is actually a shorthand for flex grow, flex shrink, and flex basis. And when you declare it with just this one value, it's interpreted as flex grow. Now we'll also add flex 1 to the toggle, and this will basically instruct the browser to split any space equally between these elements. And here we'll also do a text align right just to push that element to the right side of the page, and we'll set an order of 2. Now we're setting the order of 2 because I'm going to now target item button. I'm going to set a width to auto, and I'm going to set an order of 1. And I'm going to set a display to block. So by doing that, we're basically reordering our menu. We're putting logo first, and then the item with the order of 1, the buttons, and the item with an order of 2, the toggle. So we have logo, buttons, toggle. Now let's go ahead and style these buttons a little bit. And I'm just going to fast forward here because it's a really simple styling process. All right, so for these 2 buttons, these are the styles that we're going to use. It's a simple matter of changing the background color, the borders, and removing text decorations from the links, and also adding a hover state for the primary button. It's really very simple. And there you go. That is the tablet menu. You'll see that now when we go below 700 pixels, we revert back to our small menus. But when we go above 700 pixels, we are switching to the tablet menu. Now, the final thing to do here is create the desktop menu. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, for the desktop menu, we'll also be using a media query, and we'll do the following. We'll start with the items. We're changing the order so they're before these 2 buttons, so order 1. We're setting their position to relative because the submenus will be positioned absolutely, right? So position relative here, make sure the submenus are in their correct position. Next, we're setting display to block and width to auto. Previously, we had width set to 100%, but we're setting width to auto so they automatically occupy just enough, the minimum amount of space. The buttons, we're setting the order to 2, so they're after my menu. And then the submenu, we're setting a display to block. We're setting its position to absolute, and because they're going to be relative to the parent list item, we're setting left to 0, top 68%. So they just sit below the parent element. And we're just setting a background to them. We're hiding the toggle element, and we're removing the border radius on the submenu. And that's all there is to it. Now this is the desktop version. And if we switch back here, we can find the tablet version. And here is the small version, the phone version. That's pretty cool, right? Only one left thing to do here. You can see that on desktop, when I open one of these submenus, I have to click back on the menu item to close it. Ideally, I would like to be able to click anywhere on the page to close that submenu. So this is actually something that we can do very simply from JavaScript. So let's switch back here and we'll say close submenu from anywhere in the page. We'll define a function. We'll pass in E as the event parameter. We'll declare a variable call is click inside equals menu contains e.target. So basically, this will be true or false. If I click inside the menu, this will be true. Otherwise, it's going to be false. So with that, we can do the following. If we're not clicking inside the menu and the menu is active, so we'll say menu query selector submenu active, then we can simply do menu query selector submenu active classless remove submenu active. Cool. So now all we have to do is say document, add event listener, on click we'll be running close submenu. And that's all there is to it. Now, if I have a submenu opened, if we click outside, it doesn't work. Maybe I made a mistake here. So is submenu active? Query selector. That's without this bit here. So we're removing the submenu active class. Let's see. Perfect. So now we can close that submenu from anywhere in the page. And with that, our responsive navbar is now complete. All right, and that's it for this tutorial. Thank you for watching, and make sure to also check out Anna's written version, the original written version, where she goes into much more detail about this entire process. Thank you very much for watching. I'm Adi Purdila, and until next time, take care.